All right, friends, so you know what everybody's going to be talking about after this preseason game. The score, 17-0, and they're going to point straight at the quarterbacks for it. But honestly, that's not where I'm looking this morning. I watched this offense get stuck drive after drive, and it wasn't really about who was throwing the ball. It was about what was happening up front, guys. First team, second team, didn't matter. There was a group out there that just could not hold up, couldn't create any push in the run game, couldn't protect consistently either. And there's one guy specifically who had a rough enough night that it's got to be a real conversation heading into next week. So stay with me, because in this video, I'm also going to get into the winners and losers from week 2 and why it actually matters for this roster going forward. Hello, Steelers fans. If you're new to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Okay, so let's get right into it, because this offensive line stuff really did jump out at me from the very first series. I mean, the Jets defense came out against the first team unit and just walked right down the field like it was nothing. And you're watching that thinking, all right, this is preseason, maybe it's just early rust. But then it kept happening, drive after drive. This group up front just wasn't winning the physical battle. And honestly, the guy who stood out the most for all the wrong reasons was Broderick Jones. I mean, look, I know he's been working on adding weight, trying to get back to a certain playing size, and maybe that's part of what's going on here, but he was struggling even against the third and fourth string edge rushers when he got in there in the second half. That's not a small detail to me, guys. Giving up pressure to a starting caliber pass rusher, okay, that happens, that's the NFL, but when you're getting beat by depth guys on the other side, that's a different kind of problem. He gave up multiple sacks in this game, one against Will Howard, one against Drew Allar, and at this point, I'm honestly not sure he's a lock to make this 53-man roster if he keeps playing like this. And it wasn't just him. That's the part that really gets me, honestly. Because if it was just one guy having a bad night, you kind of shrug it off, right? Everybody has an off night. But Ryan McCollum had a really costly holding penalty early in the second half that killed a drive before it even got going. And when you combine that with what Broderick Jones was dealing with, you start to see a pattern here, not just an individual mistake. So now you got to ask yourself, is this a run blocking issue? Is this a pass protection issue? Or, and this is the scary answer, is it both? And from what I watched last night, honestly, it looked like both. The run game could not get any push whatsoever. First team, second team, didn't matter who was out there. They just were not moving bodies off the ball. And then in pass protection, you had guys getting collapsed into the pocket way too fast, which is exactly why you saw both these young quarterbacks under duress for a good chunk of the game. Now, here's the thing, and this is where it connects right back to that final score, 17-0. When your offensive line isn't holding up, it doesn't matter how much talent you've got at the skill positions, you're going to struggle to put points on the board. And that's exactly what happened. The Steelers had a missed field goal, they had a failed fourth down conversion, they had a couple interceptions, and yeah, all of that stuff shows up on the stat sheet as separate issues, but when I really break it down, a lot of that traces right back to that O-line not giving these guys a real chance to operate.
Now let's talk quarterbacks, because I know that's what everybody's going to zero in on this morning. Will Howard threw 2 interceptions today. And look, on the surface, that's not a good back score. But I gotta be honest with you, when I go back and watch those throws, it's not as simple as just, oh, he made a bad read. There's a real conversation to be had about Roman Wilson cutting his route upfield instead of running it the way it was drawn up, which basically hands the defender a free chance to jump the route. Now, I still want to go back and look at the all-20 before I fully make up my mind on that, but if that's really what happened, then this isn't purely a Will Howard problem. This might be more of a route-running issue from Roman Wilson. That said, I don't want to let Will Howard completely off the hook here either, because he's fighting for a roster spot. He's trying to convince this coaching staff to carry 4 quarterbacks, and 2 picks is 2 picks, regardless of the circumstances around him. But I will say he did have some good moments too. He had a nice third down conversion where he stepped up in the pocket and found Ben Skowronek, so it wasn't all bad for him tonight. It's just that the interceptions are going to be the headline no matter what else he did well. Now let's flip over to Drew Allar, because honestly guys, I actually think he had a pretty good night, even though the stat line doesn't really back that up on the surface. He completed less than half his passes, his quarterback rating was way down from where it was last week, but when you actually watch the tape, I don't think that's on him. I think that's on the group of receivers he was throwing to. He was putting the ball where it needed to be. Tight windows, good timing, and guys just weren't bringing it in. He had that throw out of structure rolling to his left to Lake McCree that was honestly a really impressive play. And then on that final 2-minute drive, he found Isaiah Winstead over the middle with a beautiful throw. He nearly drove this offense down for a touchdown right there at the end. And if a couple of those drops near the goal line go differently, we're having a completely different conversation about how this game ended. So for me, even with the underwhelming numbers, Drew Allar showed me some real arm talent again this week. It's just that the players around him didn't do him any favors. And that actually brings me to somebody who I think benefits the most from how these two young guys played tonight, and that's Mason Rudolph. Because when you watch Will Howard and Drew Allar go through some ups and downs like this, it kind of reminds you why Mason Rudolph is valuable to this roster in the first place. If something were to happen to Aaron Rodgers during the season, I think it's pretty clear that Mason Rudolph gives this team the best chance to go out there and still play solid, functional football as that number 2 guy. So, even though he didn't play in this one, I think his stock as the backup only went up after watching this game. Now let's talk defense for a second, because honestly, there were some really encouraging signs on that side of the ball, even with the offense struggling the way it did. Rayshawn Jenkins had a strong showing early, especially when he was sent on the blitz. He's been trying to lock down a role in that safety room, and with the Steelers reportedly connected to some veteran safeties in trade talks, I think a performance like this really helps his case. If he's shown he can go out there and play well in a real NFL setting, that makes it a lot harder for the front office to justify going out and getting somebody else at that position. And it wasn't just him either. Jack Sawyer had a really nice pass deflection where he blew up a screenplay, and then he added a sack on top of that, so he had himself a solid first half out there. Then you had Carson Bruener, who blew up a running back in the backfield on a blitz to get home for a sack, and from what I saw, he was pretty stout against the run too. That's a guy who's going to make this roster purely off special teams value, but if this defense ends up dealing with injuries at outside linebacker, I wouldn't be shocked if he sees some real playing time there.
And then you had Elandon Roberts out there making plays all over the field in his first action back with this team. He knew exactly where the ball was going every single time, and I don't think he missed a tackle all night, and he came up with a big stop on 4th down that really mattered in the moment. So between him, Carson Bruener, Jack Sawyer, and Rayshawn Jenkins, I thought this defense actually tackled really well and played with a lot of energy, especially up front and at the second level. Now, I got to bring up Patrick Graham here, too, because I really liked the blitz packages he was dialing up tonight. We saw a little bit of this last week as well, and when Mike McCarthy was asked about it, why they're showing so much of their pressure looks this early in the preseason, his answer stuck with me. Basically saying, if you want to be a team that blitzes, you got to go out there and practice blitzing. And you could see that mentality on full display tonight with some of these exotic looks coming from Patrick Graham. Now, switching over to the backfield for a second, because I think Kaleb Johnson put himself back into the conversation tonight. After getting basically nothing to do last week, just a couple carries, he got a real workload in this one, somewhere around 10 total touches between his carries and catches. He wasn't spectacular, but he was solid, and the fact that he was getting that much run tells me the coaching staff wants to get a real look at him before they make any final roster decisions. Now, on the flip side, there were a handful of other guys who didn't have great nights. Caden Wetgen was mostly working as a return man tonight rather than out at receiver, and he had a fumble that nearly cost the offense a possession, plus another catch where he barely hung onto it with his fingertips. That's a concern, because if he's going to be leaned on as a returner this season, he's got to be more secure with the football. Jeremy Bernard, who looked really good last week, only saw one target tonight on a fade route and got shut down by the coverage. Eli Heidenreich didn't get a ton of run either, and honestly, watching him out there, it still looks like he's figuring out the running back position, so his path forward might end up being the practice squad rather than the active roster. And then Laith Marjan missed a field goal tonight that would have at least gotten this team on the board, and with a miss like that, I wouldn't be shocked if his roster spot is genuinely in jeopardy heading into next week. So when I zoom out and look at this whole game, the biggest thing the Steelers got to fix before they take the field again is that offensive line. Both in the run game and in pass protection, that group has to find a way to gel, because right now it's holding this offense back more than anything happening at quarterback. The defense showed me a lot of good things tonight. Guys up front and at linebacker flying around and making plays, but if that O-line doesn't clean things up fast, it's going to be a long night again next time out.